From when I was a young boy, I loved orchestral music. When I first heard rock and roll when I was a teenager, of course I was massively attracted and it spun my head around, but I didn't stop loving my orchestral music. So I think what has probably defined me over these many years as a musician is my love for both kinds of music. And now I'm no longer in Deep Purple, and I'm writing a lot more orchestral music now as I get older. You know, it seems to be what I want to do now for the rest of my days.
שלום לכם, כאן לפיד, אני מזמין אתכם לתוכנית כשרוק, פגש בקלאסי. תוכנית שמוקדשת לזכרו של אחד האומנים הכי גדולים בדור שלנו, ג'ון לורד, האורגניסט והקלידן של להקת דיפ פרפל, שהיה חלוץ בשילוב מוזיקת הרוק עם המוזיקה הקלאסית. ג'ון נפטר בגיל 71, ב-16 ביולי 2012. גרשון מטל על הביצוע הטכני, שתהיה לכם האזנה טובה.
My father was a semi-professional musician. He played in the evenings in a dance band, which he had begun during the Second World War. He was in the fire service, and he also started the fire service dance band. So I remember from quite an early age music being played in the house and so on. When I showed that I had some desire to play the piano, I suppose around 4 years old or 5 years old, he and my mother decided that I should take piano lessons.
You don't cry no more. Well, I'm begging you. Don't cry no more, girl. I say I'm begging you.
I had a band called the Artwoods. The singer was Arthur Wood, the elder brother of Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones. Sort of a rhythm and blues band. That was my first professional band. I'd started in the band, the Artwoods, on piano, but then we quickly decided that we'd heard some of the American blues recordings from Chicago where they were using a Hammond organ. And also I'd heard a wonderful organ player called Jimmy Smith, who was the king of the jazz Hammond. And that inspired me to want to play this instrument.
Hey. Cry me a river, you cry me a sea. You'll never leave without a doubt. You really, really, really love me.
המוזיקאי דניאל רטנר.
מה שמאוד השפיע על ג'ון מבחינת איך הוא ניגן על ההמונד היה ב-67, כשהוא ראה בהופעה בלונדון את להקת ונילה פאג' שהקלידן והזמר שלהם מרק סטין השתמש בהמונד בתור כלי שאפשר להוביל להקה. ובתור שנה 67 כבר הארטוודס התפרקו, וג'ון הקים להקה חדשה ביחד עם אחיו של ארטווד, את רון ווד, את להקת סנטה ברברה משין-הד. הם סך הכל הקליטו רק 3 קטעים, אבל הם היו קטעים אינסטרומנטליים שהקלידים, ההמונד ממש הוביל את השירים. אחר כך ג'ון הצטרף ללהקת הפלאר פורטמן, זה היה בדיוק אחרי היה להם להיט ענק בשם Let's Go to San Francisco. ג'ון לא ניגן בשיר הזה, הוא בעצם לא הקליט איתם בכלל, הוא רק ניגן איתם בהופעות, ביחד עם הבסיס ניק סימפר, שביחד עם ניק סימפר ב-1968 הוא הקים את להקת די פרפל, ביחד עם איאן פייס, ריצ'י בלקמור ורוד אבנס. התקליט הראשון של די פרפל, Shades of Deep Purple, היה להם להיט ענק בארצות הברית שהגיע לטופ 5 שם, בשיר בשם הש.
Richie came up with Deep Purple because it was his grandmother's favorite old song. There was a version of it by Nino Tempo and April Stevens, which was a huge hit. The reason we also liked it is because it didn't actually mean anything, just a color. We had some other names, if we'd called them, they would have dated the band very quickly. But the great thing about the name Deep Purple is it doesn't date. You could imagine a band calling itself that now. That was the reason we kept it.
Deep Purple's drummer, Ian Pace.
Shades of Deep Purple was recorded amazingly quickly because we'd been in a house north of London and we'd been rehearsing the songs that we decided we would record. The record was done in 2 sessions, which were 4 hours each. We went in one day, played for 4 hours, got 4 tracks, left, went home, came back the next day, did another 4 tracks for 4 hours, and that was it. The recording was just basically capturing live what we'd been doing in the rehearsal room. Once we'd done our bit, the producer and the engineer did the mixes and the record was finished. The recording was very, very simple in those days. You had limited technology and you had to try and capture a live performance. Hush was just one of them. It was a very commercial song. It'd been done before by Billy Joe Royal and it was quite a gentle country tune. John and Richie just saw it in a more rhythmic fashion. And it was John's idea to sort of use the samba, Latin American rhythmic feel on the organ to give it the basic rhythmic pattern, which helped make the song a big success.
Keyboard player, Rick ווייקמן.
But when I heard the Shades of Deep Purple album, the organ playing was so different, it was so unique, so I've got to check this man out.
If the day would only come, then you might just appear, even though you'd soon be gone. When I reached out my hand, if I could see you.
We used a string quartet for the first time. It was nothing particularly new. I mean, bands had used string quartets before. Of course, the Beatles on several of their tracks, and then later full orchestras. It was not particularly a new idea, but it was just something that I felt was quite right for that song. I think it was the first really good song that I managed to write, Anthem. Became very pleased with. I had a very strong idea of what the song was about. Rod helped me to make the words more singable. My problem is that I don't sing very well. I mean, I can sing in tune, but you wouldn't want to pay money to listen. So when I'm writing songs with lyrics, I need to sometimes ask a singer about the way you would sing a certain phrase, just to make sure that it's correct. I think that's the way Rod and I worked on that song.
Ian Pace.
The anthem was very much relied heavily on John's involvement in his creative and composer abilities. The first 3 albums that Deep Purple made, it was really a search for identity. And you can see in some of those early albums John's desire to try and incorporate classical music and classical composition and structure into rock and roll.
I suppose this is where I was, half of my mind was at the time, this idea that maybe rock bands and classical musicians could play together with some sort of common feeling. and I had come up with the idea of this song, and Richie had come up with a piece for acoustic guitar. We played it together, acoustic guitar and organ, and it seemed to fit somehow that it would travel along its journey, this little tune, and then go into this other tune, this more rocky tune that I'd written. And I decided somewhere in the middle that we should have the transition. So we used some strings and some woodwind and a choir, I think. It was the first real attempt after Anthem to see if I could make this cross-genre music work. I have to say, it's been incredibly popular over the years with various people. Now that I'm playing as a solo artist, I'm getting a tremendous number of requests to play it, so maybe I'll have to learn it again.
ווייקמן.
I pretty much collected all the Deep Purple albums. I was very good friends as well with the original bass player, Nick Semper. When an Deep Purple album came out, I tended to go and get it. Mainly, to be honest with you, I was, being a keyboard player, I was interested in what John did. So that was the main reason I bought it, because it's one of the few bands that really featured an equal feature of the organist, the keyboard player. I like things that are unique, that you go, wow, that is something special that belongs to that person. And that is what John genuinely really achieved. It was unmistakable when he did something, wrote something, played something as part of an album or just as a soloist or whatever. It was so obviously John, it could not be anybody else. And that's an art. That is a real art form to be able to create that, and that's what John did. So it was always very interesting to hear John's new work and what he did. I like the way that he sort of did that infusion of sort of classical influences within the rock genre. And probably that's as good an example for anybody who did that.
איאן פייס.
That was John's first real extended composition, which incorporated a string section specifically written to go into a rock and roll piece of music. It was almost like an embryonic for group and orchestra part, because it was the same basic concept. You would have the two elements opposing each other and then joining together. That basically was one of the seeds that started that whole thing in his mind.
ב-24 בספטמבר 1969 התקיימה הפרמיירה של הקונצ'רטו ללהקה ולתזמורת באלברט הול שבלונדון. כך תיאר זאת שדר ה-BBC דרק הארט.
It happened in London. It happened in the Royal Albert Hall, the world premiere of a new musical event. These scenes of unrestrained enthusiasm took place in London. And for the thousands of people who packed the Royal Albert Hall that night, it was a unique occasion, one which brought together two worlds of music, symphony and pop. One of Britain's most distinguished composers, Malcolm Arnold, conducted the combined musical forces of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and the Deep Purple in the first performance of the concerto for group and orchestra. It was written by Jon Lord, who founded the Deep Purple group and whose vocalist is Ian Gillan. Malcolm Arnold is himself the complete musician. Formerly an ace trumpeter, he's written concertos, ballet scores, symphonies, and a whole mass of music for films. He's impressed by Jon Lord's music.
I had this bee in my bonnet, this idea for some years about the combination of rock group and orchestra. As we've discussed, I made small attempts at it with Anthem and again with April. I had spoken to my manager sometime in the beginning of '69, and I said, like, I have this idea of a concerto that I'm writing for group and orchestra, and if we can ever think about doing it, it would be great. And he took me seriously, thank goodness. he actually moved very quickly to book the Albert Hall and to book the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. I went to the rest of the guys in the band and said, look, I'm writing this. Would you like to play it? Shall we do it together? And they said yes. In a way, it was a wonderful thing because it caused an enormous storm of controversy in England at the time. Some people in the rock side of the world didn't like it, others did. Some members of the classical world hated it and others didn't. So it was a point of great discussion. It was a marvelous publicity for our new band. And then when we came out with the real Deep Purple, which was in rock, the audience was aware of who we were. And so we had our first major success as a rock band in the UK because of that album.
איאן פייס.
For a rock and roll band, especially back then in that situation, it was totally alien to us to be looking to somebody outside the band who was in control, which is what the conductor is. He's the controlling force. In a rock and roll band, the drummer is the controlling force. The drummer holds everything together. With an orchestra, you have to lose this mindset, and suddenly you are the one being controlled by the guy in the front with the stick. It's a very different discipline. John was really helpful with that. He explained to me how I must understand the movements of the conductor. In rock and roll and jazz, we play on the downbeat. That means you put your hand down, and where your hand finishes, that's the beat. In classical music, it's the other way. When the conductor lifts the stick up, that's the beat. So if you don't understand that, you'll find it impossible to understand where the rhythm is. But when you understand, you must watch the conductor's hand going up instead of coming down to be in time. Well, I never knew that. So John says, just watch Malcolm, and when he goes up, that's the beat. So for the first 20, 30 minutes, I was really confused. And John just said, just keep watching, it'll be okay. And it was.
How can I see when the light is gone out? How can I hear when you speak so silently? More than enough is never too much. Hold out a hand, I'm so out of touch.
Deep Purple's vocalist, Ian Gillan.
It was a very difficult period because there we were rehearsing songs like Speed King and Child in Time and whatever, and the next thing we're doing this thing that Jon Lord had written. We didn't really understand what was going on. And in fact, it wasn't until pretty much 30 years later that we got it and we were able to redeem the situation by doing it again properly. But it was exciting, it was dangerous. We didn't know what the hell was going on, to be honest. Roger and I were just looking at each other going, what is this? What have we done? The one minute we got this fantastic rock group, and the next minute we're playing with a Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. It was very surprising for young musicians to be involved in this, but I think probably after that it became clear that there was so much abundance of talent in Deep Purple. We got Jon Lord with his classical background and his jazz keyboard background. We've got Ritchie Blackmore with his incredible experience in recording studios, playing all kinds of music. Ian Paice with his big band, Buddy Rich background, swings like a train. And then Roger Glover, of course, with his folk influences. It was just an incredible thing, and the orchestral experience was quite incredible. It took a long while to sink in and realize what was actually happening.
Deep Purple's bass player, Roger Glover.
After Concerto, there was a concerted effort to make that our first album, as heavy and as rock as possible, which is why I think Deep Purple in rock is the album it is.
Ian Gillan.
That was the first song we wrote with Deep Purple,
absolutely the first song. And it was just a jam, and I was just shouting out the first things that came into my mind. I was full of exuberance and joy. It was just, well, I could go, I said, little Miss Molly, she was rocking in the House of Blue Light. And all these different song titles came to mind, and I just thought, wow, this is great. Just yell my head off. And of course, by the time we'd finished the rehearsal, the damn song was finished. So it became what it was, and it was basically a collection of Little Richard's song titles. Credit to the great man, Little Richard. I mean, who was, to this day, I mean, just one of the greatest inspirations. When you listen to Good Golly Miss Molly, Lucille and Long Tall Sally, you just have to shake and tremble.
רוג'ר גלובר.
I'd never been in a band that could jam like that and just have fun with making music. To me, jams were always 12-bar blues, but Deep Purple was something different. There were no rules. Basically, I think there was a kind of something in the air around that time. There was a feeling that making music was, you're either one of two things. You're either making pop music or you were underground or progressive or whatever. And Deep Purple were kind of loud, crazy band. I don't think there was any thought about the music. It just kind of flowed. It happened naturally, but it wasn't a conscious decision to go heavier or to, go more bombastic or crazier. That's just the way it naturally fell. The music came first, and no one would tell us what to do. And that was our sort of credo.
In March 1971, Jon recorded his first solo album, Gemini Suite. Rog'er Glover.
The Gemini Suite was, Jon was asked to do that after we'd done the concerto. From the band, it was Ian, Payce, myself and Jon. Tony Ashton, who was a good friend and had toured with us many times. Yvonne Elliman, who was on the same label as us. And Albert Lee, who was an absolutely brilliant guitarist. He was in a band called Heads, Hands and Feet. And they'd supported us many times in those early years. So we got to know him quite well. Jon approached it from the point of view of being in a band. Each member of the band had its own movement, as it were. So there was a guitar movement, there was a drum movement, a keyboard movement, a bass movement, and a vocal movement, and then an altogether movement. It's very daunting, actually. I remember he said, I'm going to write a part for you. What would you like to play? And I said, well, actually, I don't know, but give me something challenging, something that requires a bit of, concentrating on time, which was a stupid thing to say, really, because he gave me a very difficult part to play. But as in all the movements, there was a moment of self-expression. In each movement, there's a bit where you're left on your own to play, and that was up to every musician taking part to do what they wanted to do. It was totally free. It was a one-off at the Royal Festival Hall, I believe, and that was the only one time that Ian Gillan and Richie took part in it. When the recording came a year or so later, they declined to be part of it, which is why Albert Lee and Tony were asked to do it. But I thought it was a great opportunity, and I jumped at the chance.
Gemini Suite, this time with the London Symphony Orchestra, conducted again by Malcolm Arnold. Ian, Payce.
Malcolm was an incredibly well-known, successful classical composer and conductor in Britain and around the world. Although he was a generation older than us and from a totally different musical world, once he'd seen the score that Jon had written, he believed that it was something that he would like to be involved with and believed it would be a very, very good thing musically to do. He was a lovely guy at a time when most people in the classical world were, shall we say, not very friendly to people in the rock and roll world. There was this belief that the rock and roll was played by people who really weren't very good musicians. There was definitely a class thing. The classical musicians were far superior, and the rock and roll kids were just a bunch of amateurs. But Malcolm never did that. He accepted everybody as being the same. It didn't matter whether you were the first violinist in the orchestra or an 18, 19-year-old Ian Pace on a drum kit. He treated everybody the same, which helped make the whole thing work a lot easier.
In March 1972, Deep Purple released their most successful album, Machine Head. Ian Gillan.
We were sitting on a bus. We had some journalists on board, and one of them said, "So, how do you write songs?" So Richie just went ding 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 on one string, and I started singing this thing called Highway Star, just making up words on the bus. The journalists were amazed that we could be improvising just at the drop of a hat.
Nobody gonna take my car, I'm gonna race into the ground. Nobody gonna beat my car, it's gonna break the speed and sound. Oh, it's a killing machine, it's got everything. Like a driving power, big fat tires and everything. I love it, and I need it, I feel it. Yeah, it's a wild hurricane. All right, hold tight. I'm a highway star.
Rick Wakeman.
You look back at some of his solos and the way they were structured, they're really quite brilliant. They're like little pieces of music on their own. They were really creative. They had beginnings, middles, ends, twists and turns. He started experimenting with different boxes with Hammond organ on how to, get it louder, get different sounds, get fuzz sounds out of it, which nobody had ever done before. And he succeeded tremendously. And in fact, Ritchie Blackmore is on record as saying, shortly after John passed away, he loved John to bits, but the one thing that really annoyed him sometimes was when they both had a solo in the same piece, the audience always gave a better reaction to John's solo than his. Because it was rare to have a really outstanding keyboard solo in a band that not only could be heard, but was also creative as well. And John had all of that.
Playing with Ritchie was a challenge. Sometimes Ritchie is close to genius, and other times he would be quite erratic.
Break your leg, Frank.
Gillover.
Hammonds are usually kind of a backing instrument or a solo instrument, but they're never a rhythmic instrument. Ritchie never liked to play rhythm guitar. He played riffs, he played solos, but he never played rhythm very often. And John, I think, actually learned how to play rhythm organ. I don't think there's many other keyboard players that really cottoned onto that. But if you listen to what he plays behind the songs and behind the solos, it's a great rhythm part. And so he kind of almost invented that rhythm Hammond. But that's not from the sound, that's from his head, really, and his fingers. There was a great deal of mutual respect between the two, but there was also a degree of competition between the two. Friendly competition, especially live. They would always try and outdo each other. One would play something and the other would have to play something louder or faster or better or longer or whatever. And it became a sort of duel on stage. And it wasn't malicious. It was actually quite constructive and creative. John, I think, felt frustrated because the Hammond had a sort of certain sound to it, and yet Ritchie could get this really raucous, really vicious kind of sound. And that's what prompted John to change the way he played the Hammond. Instead of going through a Leslie, he went straight into a Marshall stack like Ritchie. And that gave him the same edge that the guitar had. And John really had to master that technique and did it very well. Maybe that's why he's so unique.
Windows from 1974.
I was already working on Towards Windows. I'd been asked to do it by Eberhard Schoner, who had been asked by this German television company. They wanted a piece of music for a gala concert. They wanted to mix rock music musicians and an orchestra. And they had heard of my experiments in that area, so they asked me and Everhart to produce something. I needed to find some musicians very, very quickly, so I asked my friend Tony Ashton, I asked Ray Fennick, who I knew, and of course I asked David and Glenn, because they'd just joined Purple, if they would like to come and sing with an orchestra. And they said, sure, why not? So that's how they became involved. Almost at the same time we were working on towards recording Burn.
Yes, it's very similar to what happened in 1969 and 1970.
In a way it is, isn't it? Yes, it has a resonance somehow. It's like the rest of the band saying, oh, there's John again, off with his orchestras. And, but I got used to them making fun of me. 26 million people watched it live, so it was kind of a very, very high-pressure project. But ultimately, incredibly successful evening. I mean, the reviews in the German press the next day were astonishing.
And this Windows was long before Bill Gates.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it was. Maybe I should talk to Bill Gates about giving me some money.
Jon Lord. Glenn Hughes, Ray Fennick, Pete York, Tony Ashton, David Coverdale, Günther Salber, Violine, Gottfried Greiner, Violoncello. Das Orchester der Münchner Kammeroper, Dirigent Eberhard Schöner.
Actually, I was a classical conductor. I was not a rock musician. At this time, in the 70s, I started to work in electronics and avant-garde music. And I knew John. He is the man who worked with classical musicians in England, and he did this orchestra for rock band and Gemini Suite and so on. So after the concert, we met each other. He was very, very enthusiastic and said, oh, I heard a little bit about you, because I was a little known at this time in Germany as a young conductor. He said, would it be possible that we work together once? It was called Windows. John wrote the second and the third movement, and I wrote the first movement. I worked from the classic part with rock musicians, and he worked as a rock musician with classic, and that was the interesting point for that album.
Charity, human kindness, family, human blindness.
Glenn Hughes.
John is very classically orientated, and when he asked me to perform on Windows and Coverdale, of course I said yes. It was something completely different for us, but I enjoyed it. The Windows project, it was a wonderful time in Germany with Eberhard Schöner, the director of the orchestra, and it was a beautiful time in the Deep Purple period. It was a great time.
Strange these games we play. Games we
Conductor Eberhard Schöner.
One day I said, let's start to work with dances, saraband and bourrée, whatever. And he agreed and said, that's great, that's wonderful, let's do that. And so he started to work. It came out that we worked with the Philharmonia Hungarica. We produced it in Germany and we recorded there, and it was actually very, very successful. We used the old system, composing from the 17th, 18th, 19th century, to use the rock musicians much more as classic musicians. So Andy Summers, for example, played on it. He played classical guitar, the guitar player of Police later.
This was as a result of meeting German conductor-composer called Eberhard Schöner. We talked the same language. We had the same ideas about crossing barriers between different kinds of music. Actually, not so much barriers between different kinds of music, but different kinds of musicians. because the barriers exist in the musicians' minds. The barriers don't exist in music itself. It was a question of changing hearts and minds, and I wanted to write something that would be quite immediate, that would be tuneful, and would make it easy for people to understand what I was trying to say. And the result was the Saraband suite.
When we did it was very new at this time. It was not recorded later on for the rock musicians. We played at the same time with the orchestra. And that was very new and very, very, very difficult to produce and to record.
ב-1973 איאן גילאן ורוג'ר גלובר עזבו את להקת די פרפל והחליפו אותם דיוויד קוונדר וגלן היוז. ב-1975 ריצ'י בלקמור עזב את די פרפל על מנת להקים להקה משלו ריינבו, וב-1976 די פרפל הגיע לסוף הדרך שלהם. ב-1978 דיוויד קוונדר הקים את להקת ווייט סנייק, וג'ון הצטרף אל הלהקה והוא נשאר איתם עד 1984, כאשר די פרפל התאחדו שוב עם ההרכב שהקליט את הדיסק אין רוק. ג'ון היה עם די פרפל עד 2002, הוא הקליט איתם עוד 6 תקליטי סטודיו, סך הכל הוא הקליט עם די פרפל 16 תקליטי סטודיו. לפני שהוא פרש מהלהקה ב-2002, ב-1999 היה 30 שנה להופעה של קונצ'רטו for group and orchestra.
Conductor Paul Mann.
When I started to conduct, one of the first things I wanted to try and do was to do the concerto. It had always been there when I was quite small and I listened to it. I remember listening to it on my grandmother's record player and conducting the music, you know, in thin air in her front room. I suppose in some ways maybe it was that piece that made me in some way want to become a conductor. And so he's always been there. And then when I felt that I wanted to try and do this piece, I contacted him and I met up with John backstage, I think in Manchester, at a Deep Purple gig in Manchester. He said, yes, great, let's try and make it happen.
The first rehearsal was the 24th, and we started rehearsing on the stage at the Albert Hall at exactly the same time we had played the concerto on that stage 30 years before. So that was a wonderful feeling. That was with the wonderful Steve Morse.
Paul Mann.
Malcolm, I think, had a different job from me because he was, I think, laboring in the field of a very hostile orchestra, one that was not really very enthusiastic about the idea of playing with a rock band. I think at that time, this is of course middle 1969, Deep Purple were not the huge legends that they've since become, and I think the orchestra was very skeptical about the idea of a piece written by a member of a band like that. And John always said that without Malcolm, the whole thing would just have disintegrated into chaos very easily. And there were members of the orchestra openly showing their derision and hostility in the rehearsals. By contrast, when we did it in 1999, the London Symphony Orchestra, different orchestra than the Royal Philharmonic that they used in 1969, but the London Symphony Orchestra were just there to enjoy it. They loved every minute of it. One of the violin players came up with a copy of In Rock and said to to John, you know, when this album came out and I got this album, it was illegal for me to have it, you know, and consequences of me having this album could have been really serious. And I can't now believe that I'm here making music with you.
John's album, To Notice Such Things, was released in 2010.
It's the third one I've done since I left the band. One was the piano concerto album, Boom with the Tingling Strings. One was called the Durham Concerto, which I released a couple of years ago. And then this one, I wrote it last year in memory of a friend of mine who had passed away, a well-known writer in this country, a writer and a playwright and a novelist. He was a barrister, a famous barrister called Jon Mortimer. I'm very, very happy that it celebrates the life of such a wonderful man. I'm also very happy that people here in England seem to have taken a liking to it.
ווייקמן.
John just loved the Hammond organ. It was what he always wanted to play, and also being a very, very fine pianist as well. Those were the two instruments that he sort of worked on and never really wanted to get into the synthesizer side of things. I mean, when we worked together, I would put some keyboards together that were synthesizer-based and Moog-based, and John would have piano and organ, so that we had two entirely different artist palettes of colours. So I deliberately would not play the organ or not play the piano. I would play the synthesizers and John would stick to the organ and to the piano. And it just worked tremendously well. In fact, it worked so well after we wrote the first piece, which we performed at the Royal Albert Hall, the last live performance he ever gave. You know, we went away and we were planning a whole album and started writing and putting stuff together, and it would have been a sensational album. Ian Pace from Deep Purple said to me just a couple of weeks ago, it's probably the best keyboard album that was never made. It's one great sadness in my personal career that we never got to do it.
The 2012 studio recording of the concerto, Poor Man.
Indeed, it was John's final performance in the studio. We had always wanted to try to make a studio recording of this piece. As you can imagine, back in '69, when they originally did this piece, the idea of combining a rock band with an orchestra was extra complicated because there wasn't the technology to balance the two. You know, one chord from Ritchie Blackmore could obliterate the entire orchestra without any trouble at all. And when we did it in '99, we benefited, of course, from much more advanced sound technology, and we had a wonderful crew of people doing it, and the complexity of it was considerable when we mixed the live recording. I think there was 100 and something sound channels on that recording to mix. It was very complicated. But even with all that, I think there was an element of compromise in balancing a live orchestra and a rock band in the concert hall. And the idea of being able to do a studio recording would be that we could try to some way capture the sound that John must have had in his imagination when he was just writing it. The story is well known. He was composing it lying down on his apartment floor in London, coming back late every night, just spreading himself out on the floor to compose the piece. And he must have, in that situation, had a sound in his imagination. It was that sound that we were wanting to use studio technology to capture, and I think we did that. I think it worked very well. It's become a kind of epitaph for him in a way, and I think it's a good one. Joe Bonamassa, who of course is just such a great blues guitarist, with his presence on the blues section of the second movement with the vocals, is absolutely perfect choice. And then we would get Bruce Dickinson. They know him as the singer and frontman for Iron Maiden, and of course he does that sensationally well, to sing the bigger, more muscular part that follows it.
What shall I do when they stand smiling at me? Look at the floor and they are so cool. Oh, so cool.
The decade after Jon left Deep Purple, his daughter, Sarah Lord.
I think from a friendship point of view, it was a very difficult decision. But I think from a musical point of view, it was a much easier one, because he felt that it was musically that he wanted to have more time to do his own thing. But I think he missed the feeling of being with those same men that he'd been with for years and years and years. I think he missed that a lot. Every day in his piano room, in his music room, just wrote a lot of music. That's what he was always working on something. He toured quite a lot with a small orchestra, but mostly he was just writing, just composing. Wrote music every day.
What shall I do?
This has been a wonderful time for me these last few years after leaving Purple, because it was a terrifying decision to make, to leave something that I had loved so much. I was a founder member. It was my band. I felt like it was my band, and I had been inside this very protective situation of being in a major band for many years and a band that was still working after 30-odd years. So it was a big leap of faith to jump out of that comfort zone and into the cold, wide world, on my own. Since then, I have had the most wonderful time writing my music. So I don't feel I made the wrong decision. I feel I made exactly the right decision. And I'm so pleased that Deep Purple are still touring and still going on. I think it's wonderful that they're still doing it after all these years.
If you could talk to Jon now, what would you say? Ian Pace.
If I could talk to Jon now, I would have said to him, it would have been really nice if you could have stayed with the band for another 2 years. I don't think Jon had said all he needed to say in rock and roll. I think he had some more things that he could have done.
Wisman.
If I could speak to Jon now, I would actually say thank you. Jon said to me shortly before he died that it was so important not to waste time if you had music to write, music to record, music to play, and music to leave. It was so important that you did as much of that as you possibly could, because none of us know when we're going to be taken away. That's exactly what I'm doing at the moment. I'm trying to get as much of the music that I know I want to get done. I want to get it written, performed, recorded, and written down. There's a lot of stuff that I've said, I might do that next year, or I might do that in 5 years' time. I'm now trying to do it all as I go along, thanks to Jon.
Roger Glover.
If I could say anything to Jon Lord now, it would be a great deal of gratitude for the friendship and the guidance and just wonderful man that he was. And I miss him very much.
עד כאן שעה של כשמוזיקת הרוק פגשה במוזיקה הקלאסית שהוקדשה לחלוץ ג'ון לורד, ששילב לראשונה נגנים קלאסיים עם נגני רוק. אני רוצה להודות לדניאל רטנר, לנציגי די פרפל, איאן גילאן וגלן יוז, למנצחי התזמורות של מינכן ולונדון, אברהרט צ'רנר ופול מן, לשרה לורד, וכמובן לג'ון לורד, המוזיקאי המצוין שנפטר השנה ב-16 ביולי 2012. תודה לזקי אגוזי על הביצוע הטכני, תודה לכם על ההאזנה, שמרו על עצמכם, דניאל לפיד.